That's right. Survivor Worldwide is back on Reality Pop. It's your host, Chris Swanepoel, for those who haven't actually seen the podcast before and is only joining us here on the Australian version of the international season. And with me is my co-host, Riley, as ever. And Riley, I've had the pleasure of co-hosting the show with you when we spoke about Survivor South Africa for the last season. And finally, we're coming to your neck of the woods and we're talking about Australian Survivor. Has the wait been worth it?
Yeah, g'day, Chris. I'm so happy to have Australian Survivor back on our screens. Finally, after a long wait, over a year since All Stars aired, we finally got Australian Survivor back. So many fun characters that have really made this first episode entertaining, and obviously a massive advantage play that we're going to discuss later in this episode that has caused a lot of controversy throughout the Australian Survivor community. I know you have some thoughts on it. I have some thoughts on it as well. So I'm excited to discuss all that and dissect this cast and this episode. It's been a great premiere, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the week and seeing how the rest of the season falls out.
Jenny K, welcome to the live stream. We're also sad to see Phil go this early in the show, and we're going to break down as to why potentially they went so early in the season, and we'll definitely get into that as the podcast progresses. So how we want to run this podcast moving forward is we're doing an episode today on Monday here, 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, to talk about the premiere episode. Moving forward, we will be going live at 7 p.m. each Wednesday to talk about 3 episodes per week, where we will be touching on the highlights and the things that stood out for us on the show throughout that week. That's kind of the format that we're going to be doing moving forward. But, you know, if you want us to potentially do something like we're doing here, where you'd like to see a Monday episode and a Wednesday episode, put it in the comment. If enough people get at us and say, hey, we want to have a little bit more, I don't know if we can do 3 days a week, but, you know, we would love to hear feedback from the community. We want to evolve the show with you guys as we progress through the season as well. Now, Riley, as the season starts, one of the things for Australian Survivor that always stands out to me, and is something that I really enjoy about Australian Survivor, there's a few things I really enjoy, but this is something I really enjoy, is the cinematic type of theme that it has to its show. And it really is good at sort of showing us those previous 5 seasons and building this mythology around Australian Survivor for those that have come before, you know, and sort of ending it off with all the winners and the people that have fought. And then they bring in, it's now the age-old battle between Brains versus Brawn this season. And we get this great scene of the Australian outback, great aerial views of the landscape and how desolate and dry it looks, followed by all of these survivors jumping into different vehicles and coming into it in Mad Max style, like we've seen in the preseason. So I think they just do such a great effort at hyping seasons up and making it a cinematic experience that I really appreciate that, because it really differentiates them from other franchises out there when it comes to Survivor. Overall, we do get quite a few different people here in the early stages that we get introduced to. Were there any specific of the Australian Survivors when we get these home packages coming up here that you were quite impressed by, or your spidey senses started tingling saying these could be players to watch out for?
Well, I think the main standout there in that opening sequence was George, the snake from Bankstown, the politician who's, you know, ready to turn the game on its head, be this massive villain. He's going to let us decide whether he's a hero or villain. But I think the Australian public already seems to have decided that that George is going to be the villain of this season. So it's great that we have a massive character that has emerged this early in the season. Whether you love him or hate him, I suppose it's much like a Johnny Fairplay, or even from an Australian perspective, a Dirty Harry in that sense, where he's loved by some and despised by others. So, you know, certainly we got to see a lot of him. Other characters we got introduced to, such as Cara and Gavin, we didn't see too much of them throughout the episode, but yeah, really looking forward to seeing who all these different people are and actually getting introduced to these characters. I think that's one of the great things about Australian Survivor is the episodes go for an hour each, so we do actually get to know who these people are for the most part, if they're actually involved in the game. In the past, we haven't met too many contestants, unfortunately, but no, it looks like this is a great group of contestants, and we're really getting to know them early on, which is exciting to see.
Yeah, so one of the players that you missed out on there was, well, you kind of mentioned her, I guess, very briefly, was Kara. I got very strong Janine vibes from her, godmother, strong businesswoman. I feel like she's going to be a massive presence this season. And like you said, we didn't get to see much of her strategizing. There was different parts of the episode where we saw her and Georgia. They look like they're quite close, potentially also with Mitchell, and they were talking to Mitch throughout the whole episode as well. So I think that Kara is someone to watch out for as the season progresses. And another person also is Baden, who has done all the cycling and talks about how he's a brain because there's a lot of strategy involved in being at the top of your game when it comes to being a cyclist. And that, sometimes you've got to make split-second decisions that could be a decision between life or death. And I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of smarts that it takes to be at that level and to do cycling. I'm not a cyclist myself, but if you're doing something like the Tour de France, where it's like 200, 300, 400 kilometers, however far they go, you need to know when to pace yourself, when to push, when not to push, and all those kind of things. So it is interesting, though, that Baden is on the brain stripe. I will say that because to me, he is more of a professional athlete, and he definitely would fit in really well with the other team there as well, and the Brawn's tribe, I guess. And it's going to be an interesting theme because we're going to see this theme between Brains and Brawns kind of play out even within the Brains tribe, which I found to be quite interesting here in the first episode. Now, they also, and also we've got a couple of people here in the live. Let us just acknowledge Lancey. Great to have you part of the live stream today. Haley is Lancey's winner pick. And it's also Riley's number one pick in his draft. Riley, how were you on Haley's performance here so far in the episode? I would assume you're very happy.
Yeah, a good first episode performance. I think it's too early for me, at least, to pick a winner right now, but I'm glad I picked Haley as number one. She looks like she's, got a lot of potential as a character. I was a little bit scared toward the end there for her at Tribal Council. She did get a vote cast against her, which was a little bit unfortunate. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how Haley's game progresses. And yeah, Baden, he did have a former career in poker, also a businessman as well. So I do like that on the Brains tribe, they have at least tried to make it so that it's a little bit balanced in terms of strength. They have put some, brains who have a bit of brawn on the tribe as well, just to balance it out a little bit. And obviously we saw in this episode that it didn't exactly help too much. I'd say more so on that first reward challenge, it was the brains that didn't help, and they relied on their brawn, being the brains relied on their brawn in that first reward challenge, which was funny to see. But yeah, I think Baden is actually a really interesting pick on the brains tribe because he really does have a mixture of both. I do like to see that though.
Yeah, 100%. And we've also got analytical strategy in here. Analytical, great to have you on the show. Baden is similar to Garrett on Kage Yan. They need to give the brain stripe some strength to not let them get completely blown out. So I think it's kind of what Riley just got into here. I do think that on an Australian Survivor season, normally if you don't have Brawn, you're going to struggle because the puzzle aspect of the challenges is such a small part of a challenge within the Australian Survivor sort of landscape when you do these challenges. But one of the things I really enjoyed here, Riley, in the specific first challenge, and I kind of wished or hoped that they would bring this aspect more into the season to sort of balance things out between the brains and the brawn, is that they do get an option between using their brawn and having to chop through a bit of wood to get the key or to do a slide puzzle. And very early on, we've got the professional wood chopper there, Gerald, who puts his hand up and says, hey, I'm happy to step up. I'll do this. Obviously, none of his tribe mates knows that that's his profession at this stage, but he goes in there and does it in a couple of nanoseconds, gets through the challenge, and they move on very quickly. But I was really impressed here in the early stages by Mitch. I think some people might have thought this is a little bit ballsy that he did, but he went out there. They were struggling on the puzzle. They were there for so long, and he completely mixes up his strategy to then end up doing the brawn part and sort of start making a dent there. And then another person, I believe you picked quite highly on your draft, was Andrew, who ended up helping him there. And I think Andrew probably did a little bit more of the actual physical cutting through the log to get past that first phase. But it's interesting because it's a good challenge where they have this dynamic between choosing, and it's something, Riley, that I think that we should explore more in a season such as this. What did you think of that? I know it's been done in certain seasons, but I thought it was really smartly done in this season to sort of promote the strengths of the two different tribes.
Yeah, it was kind of funny that they, gave up on the slide puzzle. Although I do understand it. Obviously, the log challenge It's obviously still difficult, still as difficult as the slide puzzle, but it doesn't take as much mental strain, and that you're actually progressing on the log chop. Whereas with the slide puzzle, you can't really see it past a certain point. And when you're looking at it for long enough, I certainly understand that if you've made so many moves and you can't see where you're going, you can't see any path out. I certainly thought it was, while I thought it was very silly on their part to change tactics halfway through, it did work out for them, and it did help them catch up in the end. So it was good to see that they actually took that massive risk, because it almost paid off in the end there.
Yeah, and Dylan Furry also in the live chat. Dylan, welcome to the live chat. It's great to have you here. He has said that this is his first Australian episode that he's ever watched. He's very interested in how cocky they all are at the start. And Dylan, I can say that is a very Australian thing. It's called banter over here. And I love the whole Joey, who reminded me of Maddie Wahlberg quite a lot over here, having a go at the beefy Brawn's tribe on the other side, and Simon, who was my first guy pick, clapping back a little bit at him there as well. And overall, this challenge was a great challenge to see. Obviously, Wei struggles quite a bit on the puzzle part here, which you would have thought that's going to be his strength. And to be fair, I mean, Wei was an early target throughout this whole episode. She was really lagging behind at times and sort of dropping her tribe a bit at certain key points where they probably needed a bit more strength or some brains from her, and she was struggling. But we also see that Mitch is very vocal, and he's going to be very vocal throughout this whole episode. He's going to take that leadership role, and he kind of shouts over Wei even when she's trying to give instructions. So I don't think that he really helped, and that's the thing that George sort of picks up on very early in the episode, and I think one of the reasons why he gets quite annoyed by Mitch. Throughout this episode, Mitch really gave me Andrew Savage vibes, and I don't think it's going to bode well for him throughout the season. It's never good to be this vocal or to be this big leader this early in the game. We also see that in this challenge, Simon ends up picking the survival kit and the food instead of actually going for the flame. What did you think of that choice there, Riley?
Yeah, we saw a little bit of that play out later in the episode, obviously, with Simon struggling to make fire. But I mean, I think it's a respectable choice. Obviously, it's kind of hard to tell what is the best choice, really. And I think having that tarp is certainly going to help them out a little bit. Obviously, if it rains, I think not having fire. Obviously, it's freezing cold out there in the outback, as we saw in the episode. But I really think either way, it was it would have been 50-50. I think it's not a bad choice at all.
I don't think it's a bad choice in the sense that Simon is a fan, which he lets us know quite early on here in the episode as well. And he probably knew that, listen, fire is something that eventually you're going to get. When you lose, you go to tribal council, or there's another option to get it. But how easily do you get a tarb? And I don't know how much it's going to rain out in the outback, but I know in a lot of Survivor seasons, when it rains, it's pretty bad for them in the shelter. I've got a feeling they're going to be pretty dry there probably for most of the time. They do get a little bit of food, I guess, and rope. I don't know what they're going to do with the rope so much. But at the end of the day, he seemed pretty confident that the fact that he's got carpentry skills also qualifies him to make a fire, which I found quite amusing, because just because you're a carpenter, you're good with wood, it doesn't mean that you're actually going to be able to start a fire. I wouldn't say that would qualify you for it. And one of the other things that I found quite surprising was seeing the fan reaction to the fact that he couldn't get a fire started immediately, because, starting a fire without a flint is not an easy thing. All these people are like, just train for it and go and train and learn how to do it. I don't think doing it is that easy. If it was, we would have seen it happen plenty of times in the history of Survivor. And we've got analytical strategy here in the chat. He might be able to help us out with this one. In the history of Survivor, how many people have actually started a fire without the flint? I'm pretty sure we could probably count it on one hand. Riley, off the top of my head, I know Boston Rob did. Who else sort of did that from memory?
Well, but Boston Rob ended up passing out in Heroes vs Villains because of it, and we got that dramatic scene with Jerry finding him in the woods. So I certainly think it's I respect that Simon attempted to make the fire, and it seemed like he took on that leadership role really early on, which I like to see, because his tribe weren't too critical of him for making that decision. So look, I certainly think obviously it's going to be hard to create fire on day one with a couple of sticks, and it was unfortunate they couldn't get fire, but I'm sure a couple of days of pain and they'll have it in no time.
Chris Dixon says he believes that Lockie and David did it on All-Stars. I don't remember that, but it's possible. I'm not going to say that it's not. It's been a while since I've seen the All-Star season, and I'm sure when you've played one of these seasons and you go away, you probably are a little bit more prepared when you go out there and when it's required for you to make fire. One of the interesting narratives here early on, Riley, in this episode is that we get a lot from Shannon, and we learn a bit about Shannon, because all of them are introducing, I guess, themselves to each other. They're all sort of professional athletes, and they excel in their field. Like we hear about Flick being the world, I think, second in the world or a world champion surfer. You've got Gavin, who's talking about his history, and then Emmett, who recognizes him from the AFL. And she sort of notices that she's probably sort of stands out a little bit as not as big and brawny as some of these other, I guess, Brawn tribe members. But she does say that, in her profession, being a model, she's got to look after her physique, and she's got to train harder than what probably most people would know. And she does look quite in shape. But one of the things about Shannon that stood out for me here is that she's one of the people that really criticizes Simon for making the decision that he made to go and rather get the survival kit opposed to the open flame. And she talks about the fact that she doesn't think that that the fire is going to be made today, and also that they need that fire to keep insects away and bugs and things like that, and also more importantly at nighttime, so that they can stay warm. And we see these tribe members here struggle quite a lot throughout the night, because obviously it gets pretty cold. And I also really like the fact that they've got the temperature at the bottom of the tribe names for the season, because I think that it's going to give us a really good visual as to how much people are struggling out there.
Yeah, well, I think JLP said in an interview earlier this week that the highest temperature it got was 51.3 degrees Celsius. So that is, it's going to be boiling hot at times and freezing cold at other times. So I'm really, it's going to be tough on these castaways to see how they cope with the Australian heat. I think this is on a complete other level to Survivor the Australian Outback Season 2 of the US version, because this is actually in the heart of the Australian Outback. This is in the desert, whereas the US version was filmed, a couple hours from the coast. And I think it's going to be really hard on these castaways to see how they adjust. And it's going to be interesting to see, what sort of effect that takes on them, and to see, how they adjust to the temperature. Will they be burnt out at the end? What's going to happen there? But yeah, it's, always going to be a tough start on Survivor, and not being in Fiji, I think, it's heightened a lot here. Being in the harsh conditions of the outback, hot 1 minute, cold the next, raining 1 minute, desolate the next. So it's going to be, really interesting to see how that element of the climate actually comes into the game.
Yeah, 100%. Now, Analytical Strategy has said here that people that made a fire without a flint, potentially Joey Amazing, Dale did it with his glasses, which he's surprised that no one else attempted that, and that Zeke maybe not too many overall. And I also found it pretty interesting that no one tried to make a fire with the glasses. We see Way with her glasses, which seems like they're quite strong glasses, because she said her vision is really bad, and it's evident because she walked past the clue to the advantage at least 2 or 3 times on camera in that episode as well, which is quite ironic because her vision is so bad. I was surprised they didn't use her glasses to try and see if they can make fire, at least in the Brains tribe. Another person we haven't really touched on here on the Brawn tribe prior to going over to the Brains tribe here is Danny. We do get her also talking about how tough it's going to be to survive out there with the elements and things like that, and how much they need to have that fire and use the body heat, I guess, throughout the night to stay warm. Danny, one of the things that quite surprised me, I knew that she was a prison warden, or she works in she's a corrections officer, works in prisons and things like that, maximum security prison. I didn't realize that she worked with men. So, it's one thing to be a female corrections officer working in female prisons, but then if you're working with big, strong, burly men as well, and some of the worst in Australia, I really, really feel like Danny could be a dark horse still this season as well. And she's someone that's going to really be able to adapt, I think, to the can-do attitude that is going to be required to be able to go through this season. I still feel good on her as one of my picks early in the season as well. We didn't get to see much of her, sadly, in this episode, but very interesting things to get to know there about her. And then the other thing that really stood out for me here, I guess on the Brawn tribe prior to moving over to the other side, was Kez. She didn't bring her jacket with her, and she only had a tank top on and clearly wasn't prepared. I saw a couple of other people there in the background with proper merino wool jerseys, and I spoke to Pia Miranda before the season started, and she told me that she gave some sort of hints to people who are going to play in this season to make sure they get merino wool jerseys, because it dries easily and it keeps you really warm at night. So clearly, maybe we can sort of put 2 and 2 together as to who the people are that actually are asked Pia for that advice, and I think Shannon may have been one of those people, because I feel like she had one of those nice merino jerseys going in there as well. Danny was pretty quiet. What did you think of Danny's sort of intro package here? He had a little section, I guess, in the Brawn's tribe as well.
Yeah, we didn't see too much of Danny. I think it's way too early to really, analyze too much about these characters. Obviously, we've only had one episode, but Danny's someone that I feel is going to be, obviously going to be very strong in challenges. I mean, you just look at him and he's an absolute specimen. He would look right at home on a show like The Gladiators. I mean, he would just absolutely dominate, and looks like it's going to be one of the stronger members for the Brawn tribe. One of the things I found interesting on the Brawn tribe was Shannon obviously saying that she feels a little bit on the outs because she's not, as big of a gym buff as some of the others. Although I do believe that she's also a personal trainer, so that might come in help. That might come in handy for her to, try and create some of those bonds. But I think that's the interesting thing about this Brains versus Brawn split is this Brawn tribe. They're all, these massive Adonises, and it's going to be really interesting to see whether they all stick together because of that common bond, and how they're going to assimilate with those Brains members down the line when it comes to a tribe swap. Because at the moment, they look so physically strong, and it almost looks like they're just going to, take all the Brains out in their path and, leave them for Wake.
100%. I tell you what, if I knew that there was a model out there, immediately I'd be worried after David just won the previous season as a model. That should be the career people should go and lie about when they go on the show. People lie about so many of their careers. I'm surprised she was honest to say that she is a model going out there playing the game. So Jenny Kay said that if she's not mistaken, she thinks this is the first time that they've actually shown the temperature on the screens for any Survivor version, international version. I think any Survivor version overall, Jenny. I haven't seen the temperature. It might have been, I've never seen it before in any of the seasons, and I really enjoy the fact that they're doing it because it really gives us an idea as to how much they're going to be struggling out there in the elements as well. Lancy says that Kez didn't pack a jacket, and she's laughing at that. I don't think it was the smartest move there by Kez not to have a jacket in there. I'm not too sure if she was a fan of the show prior to playing it. She was my second last pick, I think my last female pick in my tribe. But I do feel like she's got some room to move. She's going to fit in really well with the younger crowd and the athletic bunch there, so she might still be doing so well, or do pretty well moving forward in the game. Now, the Brains tribe was an interesting one. We had some people earlier mention, and I've got to be honest, Australian Survivor for me, Riley, it's edited in a way sometimes where it can become really predictable as to who's going to be the winner of the season. I mean, David, I had a pretty good idea, like, this guy's just running circles around everyone, and in the beginning there was a few people where it could still go, but Hayley had such a strong edit here in the first episode that it really gave me winner vibes from the start. And I know it's early season, I'm making a bold claim. I love to do it. I love to make bold claims right off the bat. I think that Hayley potentially could be running away with it, so we should look out for that tonight when it airs again to see how much of an edit she's going to get tonight. She's basically the narrator here for the Brains tribe throughout the early stages, right?
Yeah, I don't like reading into the edit too much, but it's certainly nice to see that Hayley has got herself in a good position so early on. Obviously, when it comes to our draft, she was my first pick somehow, and it seems as though everyone's got high praises for her. So let's hope that one lasts throughout the season. Especially given my performance in that Survivor South Africa draft so far. But yeah, I really like Hayley. She looks like she's going to ingratiate herself well with the tribe. Obviously, one of the big concerns for her was she drew a vote at Tribal Council. Obviously, it was just the one vote out of 6 there, so nothing to write home about. And it will certainly be an interesting story if she can build from that and go all the way to the end. But yeah, I think it's too early to call winners out just yet. I think there's a couple of people I've already ruled out, just because of how strong and abrasive they've come off in this first couple episodes. And I think it's going to be hard for them to maintain that streak. And namely, one of those big rivalries that emerged early on in the Brains camp was Mitch versus George, two very strong vocal players. And obviously both of them were very vocal in the first reward challenge, trying to call the shots while Way was obviously on the top directing the tribe. They had a little bit of conflict there, and it's carried over back into camp. And it seems that Mitch is really intent on keeping the tribe strong and making sure that everyone is, kumbaya, almost bringing the Brawn mentality into the Brains tribe. Whereas George is really looking at it, not so much in terms of the muscular strength of everyone, but also, the individual contributions beyond just the challenges.
No, 100%. One of the, and I've got to acknowledge in the chat, everybody is loving Hayley, and I think I'm the same. Like, I don't want to jinx her, but it just was that strong of an edit. So, if it quacks like a duck and it walks like a duck, I have to call it a duck, right? So I just felt like she had the best edit of anyone in this first episode. We got a lot of her perspective and her thinking around the strategy and how she wants to play her game. Obviously, we got that whole package of what she does in her daily life, which looks really interesting, working with placebos and things like that, helping people with sort of pain relief. I think it's a very important job that she's doing. And I think because of that, she's going to have a lot of empathy for people in different situations, because I think if you're doing that type of job, you need to have empathy for people's pain and what they're going through in life. So I feel like she's, again, like I said in the opening when we did the cast assessment, I think she's a very mature person, which is going to translate really well into this Brains tribe. Very interesting rivalry between Mitch and George here in the early stages of the game. And like I said, I can see why, because Mitch is clearly taking control of everything. He's clearly telling and directing people what to do. George doesn't look like someone that wants to take direction. He looks, as funny coming from a government bureaucrat, that he doesn't want to take direction. He wants to give direction. But, at the end of the day, Phil comes across a little bit to me like an Andrew Savage, and I don't think it bodes well to him early in the game as well. There is a lot of other people who do gravitate towards him, and I think that it kind of shows even at the end where people would still want to keep him after certain people were saved and there was only a few options. He does have a lot of sway in that tribe, so I don't know how soon he's going to go, but I do feel like, we saw two leaders emerge in the two tribes in this episode, in Simon and also in Mitch, and I think Simon is doing it right. I don't think Simon is overbearing in the way that he's leading, and I also think that he's sort of following up the fact that he's stepping up and doing all these clutch positions, taking these clutch positions in challenges, and he's actually winning. So that is also building to Simon's credibility as a leader within that tribe. But I feel like with Mitch, there's a lot of dictating going around. So I do understand why George gets really frustrated. One of the things, Riley, that I found really funny here was that Mitch was the person who ended up trying to make the fire, but you've got a survival expert out there like Andrew who doesn't step up to do it. And I'm wondering if Andrew has let people know that he's a survival expert, and if Mitch just thinks because he's one of the top 1% smartest people in the world that he's the right person to do it, and a survival expert wouldn't know.
Yeah, I don't think you're making too many fires in your, comfortable GP office in the middle of the Brisbane CBD. But you never know. He might be making fires in there. We don't quite know that. But no, Mitch has come across as a very strong personality. I feel like, with Simon, he's come across as a lot more laid back, and it feels like his tribe are willing for him to lead. Whereas within the Brains tribe, and I think some of this might have come from the fact as well that they've lost 2 challenges in this episode. So there's obviously some dissent there amongst the ranks, and they're not performing well at all. I do understand where Mitch is coming from in wanting to keep the tribe strong, and I do think it's actually probably the right thing for the Brains tribe at this early stage in terms of their direction. Later down the track, they do want to make sure they're strong in challenges. Losing 2 in a row at the very beginning is going to be, very debilitating for that tribe, and they're really going to struggle if they continue to take out these strong players, and players like a Mitch is targeted, and then say a Joey or a Rachel, these bigger people who can actually put in a good effort in the challenges. So I understand where Mitch is coming from, but he has come across as a little bit of a dictator doctor, as George likes to describe him. So he's obviously rubbing heads with the wrong person. But then again, I think I'm also a little bit critical of George for coming out of the gates so quickly and being such an aggressive character. I'd imagine being in the Labor Party, he wouldn't exactly be able to turn that off, and that's what he's doing every day of his life. So it's no surprise that he's
10 years,
coming to the Australian Survivor like that. Yeah. But I think in Survivor, especially Australian Survivor, in the past, we've seen that you need to really step back at the beginning of the game and let other people take control, because they're going to be the ones that play very aggressive at the front, and then they're going to get eliminated early on. So that's really what you don't want to be doing at this point in the game. You want to be, trying to keep the target off yourself as much as possible, because this is the time early in the game where they look at people and, say who's running the game right now, who's going to be the biggest threat down the line, and who don't I get along with. So I think for George, it would have been almost better to stay quiet, although I certainly understand that he does not look like someone that can actually do that and sit back and take direction. So, I get that he wants to be a big character, and he's delivered on all fronts. We've got a massive pre-merge villain right here. And, it's going to be interesting to see the fallout from this tribal council. We saw a little bit of that in an extra that was aired on 10 Play, some of the fallout from the first tribal council. But obviously that's going to carry over into this episode, and we're going to see a massive feud brewing between Mitch and George. So I'm excited to see, how it plays out early on.
Yeah, so I've just got to say, you kind of laid out the case there for how to win Survivor, or how to win Australian Survivor, right? But if everybody played that way, we wouldn't have had Australian Survivor season 6. It would have the show would have been done after season 1, because it would have been a snooze fest. I'm not here for it. I'm here for the characters. I love the fact that George came out and said, "Listen, there's so many people who would stab from the back. I'm not about that. I like to take a hatchet and swipe them from the front as they see me coming." And that's how he's playing the game, and I respect that. I don't know if he's going to win the game. I don't think he's going to win the game. I don't think he's playing the best strategic game at this point, and we'll talk about what he could have done with the advantage when we get to that part later on in the show. But I'm so glad that we've got George playing this season, because such a big character. He's getting so much hate online from different people saying, how could he have done this? And he's playing terrible. And, Phil's gone home. And yes, we're sad to see Phil go home. And we haven't even spoken about Phil yet. But at the end of the day, it's great TV. Come on, guys, you got to appreciate and put 2 and 2 together and say, we've got to appreciate the characters that makes the show fun. If he's making you feel a certain way, even if you're disliking him at this point, that's good. It means he's doing his job. The worst thing that he could do is nobody caring, or him not getting any airtime. There was a lot of people who didn't get any airtime this episode that you wouldn't care if they're in the game still or not, but you're feeling a certain way towards George. So I think he's being successful in that sense in the game already, and he's definitely the producers, I bet you, is loving what they're seeing. And I did want to talk about Phil here a little bit as well. We get a little bit of an introduction to him, and he said that he's always been a part of the gifted program at school, and that's why he's in the Brains tribe. Phil looks like just such a lovely character and such a nice person, and he's so soft-spoken throughout the whole episode, and looks like he couldn't hurt a fly, just a really nice guy. But I do feel like Phil potentially... And again, I may be being harsh because I didn't see much of his strategy here, but I do, and people are going to hate me for saying this, maybe we lost someone here early on that wouldn't have been that great TV, because he looked really passive to me in his gameplay. Could have done really well if he got past this first episode, but he looked really passive and maybe too nice for this game for me, Riley.
Yeah, it was interesting with Phil. Obviously, they came into the game, crochet king, a massive personality, obviously, but I just don't think it translated too much to the actual game Survivor. They did come across as a little bit passive in terms of their gameplay, and they didn't get that opportunity to actually, try and make moves and make an impact on the game. Being voted out first is always going to be tough. But overall, I quite enjoyed Phil from the brief amount of time we got to see him. They seem like someone that if I was on the tribe, I'd want to keep them around, because they
100%.
seem like
he looks loyal.
a fun
They
person.
look loyal.
Someone I'd be able to work with, but probably someone I'd be able to work with that I could probably lead and have them lead behind me, and as a loyal ally that's not going to stab me in the back, is what I sort of viewed Phil as. And we'll obviously discuss this a lot later in terms of the fallout from George's advantage that he played, and whether he played it correctly. In my opinion, he didn't, and there was a couple other moves he could have made there. But yeah, it's always tragic to see Phil go first, as it is with anyone. But I think the reality of Australian Survivor is you've got to have a first boot, and you've got to have a winner. So in the end, there's going to be 23 losers and only one winner. So it's a shame to see
100%.
Phil go.
100%. Now, I do want to just get to a couple of the comments here for the live viewers. Lancy says that George's find looked fishy, to be honest. I found it interesting, Lancy, because there was quite a lot of people who walked past that advantage quite a few times. And on the camera, it didn't look like they made it any more visible than what it was before. And I personally am off that camp, and maybe I'm naive that people don't lead people to clues. I know that some people believe, that they lead them to clues and things like that. I think that they make it as fair as possible in that sense. And George just so happened to be there at the right time and get the advantage. And, he picks up the advantage here, and he finds out that he can send 5 people with him away from camp, which is a massive advantage. We've never seen anything like this early in the game. And I know some people will love it and some people will hate it. I'm just happy that we saw it here in the first episode, opposed to seeing it a lot later, where it could have done a lot more damage to the voting dynamics or the course of the game. I'd rather have an overpowered advantage like this being played very early on, and it did give us a bit of an explosive first tribal council. I don't think Phil would have gone home if this didn't happen. And I do feel like this caught them off guard as well. Also here, we've got Chris Dixon saying that, yeah, George is a great character. Love him or hate him, he's bringing entertainment. Marcus is agreeing with us. Love George. We need characters like him in the game. That's what I'm saying, Marcus. You need players like this in the game to keep the show on the air, because people are going to feel a certain way. Like, I bet you tonight, people are tuning in because they want to see George be voted out. They're going to be like, I want to see this bloody Democrat or Labour Party member, this bureaucrat Labour Party member get voted out, and that's good for the show. It keeps bringing people back. I hope that George stays in the game long enough so that people really get riled up about it and they keep coming back every single week to see him get voted out. Lancey also says that George is Andy 2.0. I think that he's playing a little bit more aggressive than Andy. I mean, and it's hard to say because Andy was such an aggressive player, but I do feel like George is playing even more aggressive. And I do think that, to be honest, I think Andy could have been a better player. I just think he overplayed his hand a few times too many in that specific season. So I think overall, we do have here the first immunity challenge coming up, Riley, unless there was anybody that we forgot about. I feel like we spoke about the people. We saw a little bit of Way in her background being a city slicker, and she's sort of uncomfortable being out there in the outback, and she's just hoping that she fits in. She gave me a little bit of Cochrane, maybe a Hannah Shapiro type of vibes, and the type of archetype or character that she is, kind of out of her comfort zone, don't know how to fit into the tribe dynamics and being out there, I guess, in the outback. But overall, I think that it's quite interesting when we look at the first immunity challenge and her performance there. It's quite an interesting one because they've got this obstacle course that they've got to go through, and the Brains tribe actually leads throughout the obstacle course for most of the way, and they actually get all the way to the end to shoot the balls into the net first, but ultimately loses this. And there's two people that can be to blame for this from a Brains perspective. Way is one of them, because obviously she struggled to get the ladder untied, but in reality they still made it, and again, hats off to Phil. He helped her out there and really got them across that. But I do think, again, I have to agree with George. I think his execution is bad, but I think that Mitch was the person who made the wrong call to pull someone, and I can't remember if it was Joey. I think it was Joey. He pulled Joey off the challenge to come back to get someone new on it, which was Andrew, who needed to learn the whole the learning curve, had to start from scratch, where Simon put himself in that clutch position, missed a couple in the beginning, but then ended up just running away with it. And I do think Mitchell needs to take some blame for this. And in my opinion, I'm sure Mitchell is a nice guy, and if he does listen to this, I'm talking about how you're coming across, Mitchell, on the show. You're coming across as an arrogant ass, to be honest, the way that you've been running that tribe up until this point. And I'm sure you're not that person, and we're just seeing a very snippet of what you're doing on the show. But I can understand George's frustration. I just think how he targets him and how he goes about this here in the next phase isn't going to be the greatest. What did you think of the challenge overall? And do you think that I've sort of given a fair assessment as to the way the events played out and potentially who is to blame for them losing the second challenge here in a row?
Yeah, well, I think that was the second time that Mitch did that in the episode. Obviously, in the reward challenge, he started off in the wood chop and then gave up and handed it over halfway through. And then again, telling Joey to get off the challenge and give someone else a go because he might get tired. I think with a challenge like that, with the slingshot, the more you get used to it, the more shots you're going to get in the end. And I think had Joey stuck on it, who knows what would have happened? Maybe you would have won the challenge for him, or maybe he would have got tired. I don't mind Mitch giving everyone a go here, but when Joey's on a roll, I think just go with the flow, maintain it until he says, I want to go, or until you can clearly see him struggling, and then put Andrew in. But yeah, look, I think it was unfortunate that the Brains lost that lead there. But Simon, again, in the first reward challenge, he delivered for the tribe in terms of dictating what needed to be done from the tower up the top. And then in this immunity challenge, he obviously gets all the baskets and delivers the first immunity challenge for the Brawn tribe. So, he's really emerged as a hero early on and one of the Brawn tribe's key members.
Yeah, 100%. Marcus here sort of made two really good comments I want to just sort of point out. Firstly, he says 2 seasons ago, David was viewed as the biggest villain before he became a winner. Yes, 100%. I do think David was a better strategic and social player than George, and that's the big difference, obviously, there. But again, I love villains. I'm not going to change that. And then also he sort of mentions here, finally, thanks, Chris, someone says what I was thinking about Phil. And I'm assuming that was the fact that Phil came across as too nice for the game and he was playing too passive. And again, this is just from what I saw in the edit. And he also mentions here that in certain parts on Twitter, people went nuts when he was voted out. And I think that a lot of that outrage and people being angry at George is based on the fact that Phil was voted out and that it was the first non-binary person that was playing the game. And a lot of people wanted to see Phil go a lot deeper into the game. And I can appreciate that, but I don't think that it's George's job to go out there and ensure for that to happen. Like, George has got to play the game for himself, and he's got to try and win the game for himself. And if I was ever to play the game of Survivor, I wouldn't want to be worried about how people are going to perceive me voting out a certain individual. We don't know if Phil and George had any chemistry. They could have been talking in the tribe and we didn't see it, and George just thought, I can't get along with this person, I can't trust them, or their personalities clash. Sometimes it's a personality clash that might mean that Phil ended up not being someone that he saved. So I do think that we need to really sort of take a step back when it comes to that. And then also Dylan here says that Mitch basically screwed up the Brains in episode 1, and then he says this Brains tribe will probably be as dysfunctional as Luzon. And I kind of agree. I think that this Brains tribe is in for a hiding to nothing if they don't get their things in order. So we'll talk and speculate a little bit about what we think may happen with this Brains tribe going forward. But all good points there, Riley, in regards to Simon. I think that Simon, for me, with Haley, is the two players that I think in the respective tribes that had the best first episode. And I'm still going to say Haley, even though she was left behind and got a vote against her. I just think from an edit perspective, she was doing really well. And she's also, and we kind of skipped over this, we see that she's quite physical, and outside of the fact that she's into what she does with pain management and in science and she's and all that sort of things, she's also a ballerina and she's in really good shape. I think she might be the girl in the best shape at the moment in the Brains tribe, so they really can't afford to lose her. And I think when we see that first tribe swap coming, she's going to integrate a lot better with the sporty people probably than a lot of other Brains people. So I could see herself finding a new home with some of the Brawn people in a new tribe, who, and especially if they value the Brains side that she brings as well. But it also puts a massive target on her, Riley, because not only is she a good-looking girl, she's in shape, she's smart, she's physically fit. It's kind of like the whole package. She looks like she's socially strong, so it will be an impressive game for her to be able to make it to the end. And if she does win the game, I think that we'd be looking at it and thinking, how did people let her slip through the cracks to get this deep into the game as well? Now, pre-tribal here, Mitchell brings the group together, and I believe it was Georgia and Kara that he spoke to first, and he starts putting the target here on Wei, and he said Wei's the reason that we lost this first challenge, and then he starts getting more of his troops together in Baden and Andrew, and he's starting to build that army to go against it. I guess the other part to this is that you also see Wei trying to talk to Haley about the potential, and I thought it's interesting that they showed Wei talking to Haley about Mitch and saying that Mitch is trying to dictate the tribe quite a bit, and Haley admits to it here, saying she can understand what Wei is saying and that someone like Mitch is going to become a really big threat in the game later on as he gets more momentum because he's a tribe leader at this point. So I found it very interesting that the person who we saw the most narration from and the person who was thinking about the game the most strategic in the Brains tribe has noticed Mitch, and that could potentially give something away. Does Haley maybe even look to Mitch before she looks at George? I do think it's the wrong move. I think they need Mitch's strength still, but I also think that Mitch needs to learn to let other people speak in the tribe at certain points as well, unless he is designated as that leader by everyone. But it seems like there might be some people that are not agreeing with that, and that he's talking over them when they're out there in the challenges and sort of leading. He kind of talks to them about the fact that he wants one person to speak moving forward, I guess, so that they can have a little bit more cohesion here in the tribe. And we also get a little bit here of George and Wei talking a little bit about things. And this is where things get interesting, because George is thinking, should he use the advantage or not? Talk us through this, Riley. George's decision-making, his decision process that he goes through here, and the conversation that he has with Wei prior to going into the tribal council.
Yeah, well, I think to start with, I'm indifferent towards this advantage. Having 6 members immune at the first tribal council of the game, I think is a big misstep. I'd bring this in maybe after the first tribe swap, or very early on in the merge, so the first tribal council of the merge. Maybe not 6 members, maybe something more like 4 members of the tribe, because given half the tribe immunity this early on, it doesn't allow them to build those bonds and actually dictate a vote. And it also means that while it does create some drama, I don't think it's needed this early on in the episode to, really generate that response from fans. The actual decision to play it, I think George, in my opinion, he didn't play it the right way at all. If his target was Mitch, I think it's certainly, obviously, the right thing to do to leave Mitch there, the right thing to take away from the vote as well. I think that there's a couple of different scenarios we can talk through here. The first one, don't play it at all. Don't put that target on your back. I think with George, he's someone that wants to be aggressive, though. He wants to dictate the way the game's played. So I certainly understand that he did play the advantage at that point, and obviously it was only eligible for one tribal council. So I understand that point. What I would have done if I was in his shoes is I probably would have given it to Wei to play the advantage. Whether that means, re-hiding the advantage and showing it to Wei and saying, oh, what's it over there? And then Wei plays the advantage and he actually discusses that with her, and they figure out a way to play the advantage to get who they want out. One of the big misplays on George's part was he didn't actually use that advantage as leverage to bring in Wei and, create an alliance with someone like a Phil or a Haley, and to gather those numbers so George can say, hey, I've got this advantage, I'm going to play it. How are we going to utilize it? What is our path here? Obviously, one of the options is to obviously save all his tribal members and take them back to camp with him. What I would have done, though, if I was playing the advantage, and it'd probably get me a lot of backlash from my tribe mates, the members of my alliance, I would find the advantage on day one, bring in a couple of people like a Wei, Phil, Haley, maybe someone like a Kara and a Rachel, bring them into the alliance, tell them what's going to happen. I go home, I take the majority of Mitch's alliance, those stronger players like an Andrew, a Joey, and a Baden out of the scenario, and I make sure that a majority of my alliance is there at tribal council so they can dictate the vote and get Mitch out as we want to do. I'm not sure how close George and Phil were, but it certainly seemed like Phil was one of the options that was being brought up by Mitch and being discussed by the tribe as plan B. And George's whole his whole mantra was, I want to keep the players who are perceived as being weak on the outside and keep them in the game, because ultimately I think they're strong and I can work with them. I think it was a misplay to keep Phil and Haley there and not to and still let Andrew and the likes actually dictate the vote and obviously turn it on Phil, and Phil goes home. So I think there's obviously a lot of options here to discuss. What I would have done, as I said, I would have gone home myself, left some of my alliance members there to then dictate the vote and get rid of Mitch, because it's really going to backfire on George and it's going to paint a massive target. And in the end, he doesn't have that assurance in terms of an alliance. Yes, he's got Wei, but I don't think too many of the others that he actually brought back to camp, like a Baden and a Rachel, are going to be looking that favorably towards him. He's lost Phil at this point. Haley has been left at tribal council and she attracted votes. I can't imagine her going straight back to George and wanting to create an alliance. So it's really going to have a lot of fallout for George here that I do worry that, it mightn't have been the best way to play the advantage in this instance.
Listen, I've given George a lot of credit in this podcast. I love him as a character. But now let's get into the where the rubber meets the road. Let's get into the strategy side of things. He pulls Rachel, which who knows where she's at. We never saw her this episode. I think Rachel may work with him. And I think that he sort of leaned on Rachel and Baden as being, and even Kara, and maybe even Georgia, which is the people that he saved, as people that had more experience. And like he said, what about street smarts? What about people that have got life experience and all those kind of things? The one thing we know is that Georgia and Kara is seen talking strategy with Mitch throughout the first episode. So they're aligned with Mitch. Bad play from him already to have those, unless he played it in the way, like you said, he took all of George's allies away, and maybe he can enlighten us after the season. For all we know, Baden was talking to Mitch at some point about strategy as well. Rachel was doing it. We couldn't see what Rachel was doing, so it could have been Baden, Kara, and Georgia that effectively is alliance members of Mitch in this spot, right? But like you said, missed opportunity to leave Phil there, because I think as soon as you leave Phil there, I can understand leaving Haley to a certain degree, because I don't think they're voting Haley out here. I think she's too much of a physical presence for them as a female there that still should be in the game. But I think that Phil definitely should have been replaced with like a Baden, for instance. Baden is another jock. He's another, like I guess, Brawn within the Brains tribe. That I think that he made a massive mistake, and that's why I'm saying I don't know if George wanted to work with Phil. I think if he wanted to work with Phil, he would have saved Phil. I feel like there's something there where their personalities didn't match, or he didn't feel like he could work with him. Phil came across as saying, like, listen, I'll just vote for Way because it's going to be the easy thing to do here. It's not going to be no blood on my hand. In a normal Survivor season, that will work. In this Survivor season, it didn't work because there was a twist that saved 6 people. And I don't blame Phil for it because there's no way Phil would have known. And I'm as gutted as everybody else out there that we lost Phil, believe me, because Phil is one of my draft picks. I mean, he's low in my draft picks, but he was still a draft pick member. I didn't want to be the person to lose my first person. I'm not used to losing that many people, Riley. I think you were the one that would picking up the L's in the Survivor South Africa draft pick, but it's not a good start for me here. And we've got other people, which we'll talk about the drafts at the end, in my tribe that I'm really worried about coming into this next episode as well. So I might go down 2 or 3 people very early on in this season. Overall, though, I think it was a big misplay. Again, like I said, George just such a great speaker in Tribal Council, turning things around on Mitch here. Mitch came in thinking that it was going to be easy, but he catches him off guard a couple of times with his comebacks and the way that he talks about, how do we look at strength? How do we look at experience in the tribe? Are we just going to create the society and Survivor within our community, our tribe here, that we're going to vote out the weakest all the time because there's different strengths? And Way kind of talks to that she hasn't had the opportunity to prove herself. I do think the correct vote probably here would have been Way based on tribe performance alone. Mitch is too much of a physical presence for them to lose him here. But it's going to be interesting to see, Riley, how Mitch comes back. Do you think Mitch has got the ability? Do you think he's got the social awareness to start changing his leadership style moving forward? That's an interesting topic to sort of look at because I'm doubting it a little bit.
Yeah, I don't see Mitch changing it too much. And we did see a lot of that in one of these extra scenes that we got from looking at the after Tribal Council aftermath. Essentially, George telling everyone why he brought them back to camp to keep them safe, why he played the advantage in the first place. And honestly, a couple of those members didn't seem too praiseworthy of his move. They didn't exactly jump straight on top of George's bandwagon. And when Mitch came back to camp, George had a little bit of a feud there with Mitch, asking him to explain why they got rid of Phil, and Mitch wasn't giving him any answers. So it's going to be interesting to see how that fallout sort of emerges in this episode. I certainly think this first episode has set us up for a feud between George and Mitch. They're going to be going at it all season. At the moment, I'm viewing George as being sort of a Stephen Bradbury, someone that comes across very strong early on in the game. Not so much in terms of the Olympic sense, but more the Survivor sense. I think he's going to be a big villain early on in the game, but I don't have high hopes for him going this far because I don't think he's going to be able to create an alliance at this point. He seems like he's on the outs. He's already burnt that bridge with Mitch. He's a very aggressive character who's not going to take directions from Mitch, and he's going to continue to try and push against him. Whereas a lot of these members, like a Baden, like an Andrew, like a Joey, are actually wanting to play with Mitch. Georgia and Kara as well. They want to keep the tribe strong at this point. So I think it's almost going to work against George to be going against that majority alliance and being so vocal in it as well. I have worries for George and why. But again, I also think Mitch, I'm worried about his style of leadership at this point. I think it's going to catch up to him eventually. Maybe not this week or in the next couple of episodes. But eventually I think, people will start to get a little bit pissed off with his type of leadership and, feeling like they're under his thumb, that, that his position is going to slip in the game. I can't see him maintaining that the whole time.
100%. Now, let's get into the meat and potatoes here, Riley, and look at our draft picks. We have got our full teams here, and I will be the first person this season to lose a person. Sadly, Phil is no longer, and he's going into the elimination bracket, which will give you the one-person advantage at this stage in the game. I also want to look at who we still have left here in our teams and sort of explore who we think played the best game of this episode. And It's an interesting one. Who do we think played the best game? Because normally when we talk about this, Riley, we very strongly base it on strategy and who dictated the vote and the direction, or I do normally in Survivor South Africa. I'm very interested to know, who do you think played the best game here early on in episode 1? Because I'm still undecided. So when you pitch your person, make a case for why I should second you on that. And hopefully we don't have a draw here, I guess, in the first episode, because there's no third person to break the tie.
I think I already know who you're going to choose, and I'm going to go the opposite of that. I'm actually going to go for one of your tribe members, whereas I think you're going to go for someone in my tribe. Your first male pick, Simon. I think he played a great game early on in the game. He's come across as a leader very early on. He seems to be socially aware, but it doesn't seem like any of his tribe are really acting against him at this stage. Whereas Mitch has come across as very dominant and domineering towards the rest of his tribe, very abrasive. Simon's been pretty cool with it. He's tried to make fire early on and brought all the boys in with him. Gerald has fallen straight into that alliance, and we've seen some of those guys come together. Emmett being another one that's fallen into that fray. But no one's really getting too pissed off with him, other than I think we might have seen a little bit of negative backlash there from Kez and Shannon about not getting the fire. But for the most part, it seems like his tribe respects him, and he was probably the key member in both the reward challenge and the immunity challenge. In the reward challenge, dictating how to spell out the words, what ways to spend it, what ways to spin it. Everyone seemed to be listening to his voice. He seemed to have that effect on the tribe, whereas someone like Way really struggled to actually get the message across. So it was good to see that Simon really had that control. And then in the immunity challenge, of course, Simon hitting all those baskets to pull it out and keep his whole tribe safe early on. I think Simon's going to be someone that, obviously a very strong member of the tribe. He seems very social as well. I think he's going to be someone that goes far in the game. When in the preseason, I was looking at him as sort of being like a Zach sort of character from the first Champions vs. Contenders, but he doesn't seem to have that sort of just gym buff personality. He seems to be, very welcoming, very kind, and he has a lot of experience in life, obviously, being a jack of all trades, as you mentioned, starting out in the office and then now transitioning to being a chippy. So he's got that sort of experience, and I think he's going to, it's going to translate to the game. And I've got high hopes for Simon, so he gets my pick of the episode.
You know what? I wasn't sure who I was going to give it to, because my mind, normally when I come into these podcasts, I'm always looking at the tribe that goes to tribal council, because normally the most strategy happens on that side. And it sort of shows you who's potentially got a good brain for the game and who's dictating the direction of the game and who potentially would be leading the game moving forward. Now, like I said in the beginning of the episode, Haley to me had the best edit in episode 1. Like, I look at her and I think, man, she got a lot of good confessionals. She constantly spoke about the direction that the game is going in, or how she sees it strategically and things like that. But we didn't really get to see her exert any of that power in the game or sort of dictate where the vote was going to go, which I think is a good thing, by the way. I think it's a really good thing. She's not trying to dictate where the vote's going this early on, and that she's playing that perfect Australian Survivor game, which is to be the snake in the grass. There's no grass out on the outback for her to hide in, but to be sort of in the shadows of other people, and then come out at the end to play a very dominant strategic game to get to the end, in a very social game like she said she wants to play. I think she's doing everything right at this stage. I can't give her the player of the week, even though I think that she's going to be the best player potentially for the season, because I don't feel like she necessarily did anything to deserve it this episode. I've just got my eyes on her at this point, and I know that she's going to go far. But I kind of agree with you after you made the case for Simon, because we look at Mitch and what Mitch did wrong this episode, and Simon was the leader for the Brawn tribe, and he did everything right that Mitch didn't do right. Like, I didn't feel like he was overpowering everybody. He didn't sort of dictate things and didn't allow other people to have a voice. He didn't tell people to go pick certain things up and go get driftwood down by the lake or whatever he did to George. He didn't offend people to that way. The only thing that Simon potentially has is he potentially has someone in Shannon who doesn't like the fact that he made that decision and that he couldn't start a fire. But I do think that by day 3, that's going to be forgotten. And like you said, the tribe went on their knees to thank him when he won the immunity challenge, which you don't see very often. So I do think he's at a very high at the moment. And I think that he's got enough time in the game now. They didn't go to tribal council immediately, that he can build very strong bonds. And let's not forget, he is a fan of the game. So for me, the two people with the best edit in this first episode was Haley and Simon. And I do think Simon is a great pick for this first episode 1 player of the week. And I know you really appreciate that as a fan of the show as well, if he does listen to this at any stage. That's really it from my end, Riley. Did we forget anything? Is there anything else you wanted to talk about? I know we could probably go into who's in danger and all that, but we're going to see in about an hour and a half's time who's going to be the next person voted out. Is there any final thoughts from your end before we close the show off?
Yeah, no, I'm excited to see how it all shakes out. I think it's really going to be, the focus is going to be on George, Mitch, and Wyatt. I think they're the ones that are in the danger at the moment early on in this Brains tribe. I do think we're going to get a lot of content from that Brains tribe, and they're going to be very dysfunctional. As was mentioned in the chat earlier, I do see them as being a little bit of, a little bit like Luzon, as Dylan mentioned earlier there in the stream. It's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out. I do want to give a shout out to Analytical Strategy. He did a great video on Georgia's advantage and how that should be played. If you haven't already checked that out, I highly recommend you go over to his channel and check that one out. He dissected, why it was played, why it wasn't exactly the best move, and what other options there could be to be made. I do like, though, that Australian Survivor are thinking about new advantages and new ways to change the game. It just didn't end up being something that, I was too fond of the move in the end. But hey, we're sitting here from our armchairs, so we can't be too critical of George's game, and who knows, he may very well upset us all and go all the way.
Not me. He wouldn't upset me.
I don't think that's too likely to happen. But hey, you never know.
Hey, I'm looking to replace the Chappies poster in my room with the George poster. So, George, if you're listening to this, I want you to go very far and make everybody very, very angry out there, because you're constantly finding a way to survive. You said you survived 10 years in Bankstown politics, so I've got high faith that you know how to sidestep your way through this game. So I'm really hoping he doesn't get voted out tonight, because it would be anticlimactic to lose him this early in the game. I want to see him stay a little bit longer to keep the action going, at least. Now, guys, if you got to this point of the show, we thank you. There's been a great live crowd. We're hoping that you all join us on Wednesday when we break everything down at what time was it going to be? At 7 p.m. on Australian Eastern Standard Time. Is that correct, Riley?
Yep, that's correct.
Yep, 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on Reality Pop. We'll be talking about episodes 2 to 3, and also leave a comment in the video afterwards to let us know if you would like for us to keep a format similar to this, where we do 1 episode on the Monday and 2 episodes on the Wednesday. Otherwise, we're going to be doing 3 episodes together each Wednesday evening. We're open to getting some feedback. So, guys, please hit a like on this video if you haven't done so already. It really does help with the video getting recognized as well in the YouTube algorithms. And Analytical Strategy, special thanks for dropping in today as well and forming a part of the conversation, and everybody else here as well. Have a great night, guys. Let's enjoy the Survivor episode that will be dropping soon. See you later. Bye.